Another Monday, another Joe Lum's album review. Greetings on this Monday, June 24th, 2024. It is episode 34 of Joe Lum's album review. And today I'm going to be discussing another Black Sabbath album featuring Ronnie James Dio on lead vocals. And this one is called The Mob Rules. Anyway, when you're done, you can go and check out past episodes in the album review playlist. It's in the description box below. Let's get down to business. Mob Rules is the 10th studio album by Black Sabbath, released in November of 1981. It followed the previous year's Heaven and Hell, which I covered last week, and it was the second album to feature singer Ronnie James Dio, and the first with drummer Vinny Appice, who would join Black Sabbath when original drummer Bill Ward had left during the middle of the Heaven and Hell tour to go into rehab for his alcoholism. Anyways, here's the backstory on this album. The first new recording Black Sabbath made after Heaven and Hell was a version of the title track called The Mob Rules for the soundtrack of the film Heavy Metal. The track E5150 also is heard in the film but is not included on the soundtrack. According to Tony Iommi in his autobiography Iron Man, My Journey Through Heaven and Hell with Black Sabbath, the band began writing and rehearsing songs for The Mob Rules at a rented house in Toluca Lake in Los Angeles. Initially, the band hoped to record in their own studio to save money and actually purchased a sound desk, but according to Iommi, we just couldn't get a guitar sound. We tried it in the studio, we tried it in the hallway, we tried it everywhere, but it just wasn't working. We bought a studio and it wasn't working. The band eventually recorded the album at the record plant in Los Angeles. Mob Rules was the first Black Sabbath album to feature Vinny Appice on drums, who had replaced original drummer Bill Ward in the middle of the Heaven and Hell tour, asked by Joe Materna in 2007 if working with a new drummer was jarring after so many years. Of bassist and lyricist Geezer Butler replied no, because Vinny was a big fan of the band and loved Bill's playing. Bill was one of his favorite drummers, and so he knew how all his parts and my bass parts, and he adjusted accordingly to everybody in the band. He was brilliant. He came in and totally filled in Bill's shoes. In an interview for the concert film Neon Nights, 30 Years of Heaven and Hell, Butler cites The Sign of the Southern Cross as his favorite Mob Rules track because it gave me a chance to experiment with some bass effects. The album was the last time the band worked with producer and engineer Martin Birch, who went on to work with Iron Maiden until his retirement in 1992. Iommi explained to Guitar World in 92, we were all going through a lot of problems at that time, most of it related to drugs. Even the producer, Martin Birch, was having drug problems and it hurt the sound of that record. Once that happens to your producer, you're really screwed. Mob Rules would be Ronnie James Dio's second to final studio record, recording for Black Sabbath until the Mob Rules era lineup was reunited for 1992's Dehumanizer. The seeds for discontent appeared to have sprouted when Dio was offered a solo deal with Warner Brothers, with Iommi stating in his memoir, after the Heaven and Hell record became such a great success, Warner Brothers extended the contract at the same time, offering Ronnie a solo deal. That felt a bit odd to us because we were a band and we didn't want to separate anybody. Dio confided in an interview on the Neon Nights 30 Years of Heaven and Hell DVD that the recording of the Mob Rules was far more difficult for him than Heaven and Hell because we approached the writing very much differently than the first one. Geezer had gone, so we wrote in a very controlled environment in the living room with little amplifiers, and with Mob Rules, we hired a studio, tuned up as loud as possible, and smashed through it all. So it made for a different kind of an attitude. Vinny Appice stated in a 2021 interview with Pariah Burke that the writing for the album was largely a collaborative process done through jam sessions. He stated we put songs together by jamming and playing together and putting ideas in a pot. It's a natural way of doing it, and it works really well for us. That's how we did it. All the big albums like the Mob Rules and Holy Diver. Nobody came in with a song. Iommi reflected in Guitar World in 1992 that the Mob Rules was a confusing album for them. We started writing songs differently for some reason and ended up not using a lot of the really great material. That lineup was really great, and the whole thing fell apart for very silly reasons. We were acting like children, all of us were. The major problem noted by Mick Wall in his book Black Sabbath, Symptom of the Universe, was the balance of power between the band had shifted. With Bill and Ozzy happy to leave the heavy lifting to Tony and Geezer in terms of songwriting, coming into the studio only when they were called, even as their flair deserted them over the final dismal Ozzy era albums. At least everybody knew where they stood. Now, so the creative chemistry had shifted. The artwork for the Mob Rules cover is adapted from a 1974 painting titled Dream One, Crucifiers, from a series of paintings by Greg Hildebrandt of the Brothers Hildebrandt Partnership. The paintings were created after a projected documentary on world hunger by the brothers under the guidance of the Catholic Church fell through. Greg's relationship with the church soured, which resulted in a series of dream paintings. These paintings included Dream One, were published in 1978 by Ballantine Books in the book The Art of the Brothers Hildebrandt. There were alterations besides the inclusion of the band's name and album title. In the artwork, a hook is seen dangling from the left side of the torture implement was changed to a cross. The blood stain in the center of the piece was also altered to more closely resemble a devil's head. Go figure. Looking at the track listings for this record, all the songs were written by Ronnie James Dio, Tony Iommi, and Geezer Butler. All the lyrics were written by Ronnie James Dio himself. Looking at track number 1 is Turn Up the Night, clocks in at 3:42. Voodoo clocks in at 4:32. The Sign of the Southern Cross clocks in at 7:46. The instrumental E5150 clocks in at 2:54. The Mob Rules, the title track, clocks in at 3:14. Country Girl clocks in at 4:02. Slipping Away clocks in at 3:45. Falling Off the Edge of the World clocks in at 5:02. And the album closer, Over and Over, clocks in at 5:28. Well, Black Sabbath released Mob Rules on November 4th, 1981 to mixed reviews. In the US, it went gold, and in the UK, it reached the top 20 and spawned 2 chart singles, the title track and Turn Up the Night. AllMusic's Greg Prato called the album underrated and enthused. The Mob Rules was given a much punchier, in-your-face mix by Birch, who seemed re-energized after his work on the new wave of British heavy metal upstarts Iron Maiden's Killers record. Essentially, Mob Rules is a magnificent record, with the only serious problem being the sequencing of a material which mirrors Heaven and Hell almost to a T. Guitarist Tony Iommi acknowledged this common criticism in his memoir, admitting that he was frustrated at being accused of making Heaven and Hell Part 2, and speculating that the band would have been criticized regardless of their approach. 7 of the album's tracks were played on the Mob Rules tour. E5150 was used as an intro tape, and Over was the only song I featured on the tour in any way. While the title track was the only song from this album regularly played by Black Sabbath on subsequent tours, Falling Off the Edge of the World was performed live by Heaven and Hell, which was considered the same Black Sabbath lineup that recorded the Mob Rules, and Sign of the Southern Cross, occasionally played live by Dio. In modern re-evaluations, this album is generally looked upon very favorably, with Rolling Stone awarding the album with a positive review of 3 stars. And other reviewers, such as AllMusic's Fred Thomas, observing that Mob Rules and Heaven and Hell work well as each other's companion pieces, making the first round of Dio-fronted Sabbath material a bright spot surrounded by relatively grim efforts on either side, and classic rock complementing the lyricism alongside Tony Iommi's riffs. My overall rating for this album happens to be a 75 out of 100. While I particularly don't care for most of the songs on this record, but the ones I do, like Sign of the Southern Cross and The Mob Rules, are the only two songs that stood out for me. All the other songs on this record are pure trash. It really is pure trash. It's not as successful as Heaven and Hell was, so let's just put it to you that way. This has been Joe Lum's album review for this Monday.
No.